Hi, I'm here again to discuss with you another system which is called the muscular system. The muscles are the main organ responsible to the animal's movement as a one unit. So based on evolution on muscles evolution was still uncertain, but there were articles believe that the very old lineage of muscles were came from the lowest group of invertebrates called the sponges and the jellyfish. They discovered that there were muscles related proteins probably involved in cell motility and regulating the movement of water within their body. So this component is called the myosin. But in the muscular system, myosin was one of the protein component, and aside from actin and troponin complex. But in 700 million years ago, the emergence of troponin also appeared before the time of the platyhelminths or the flatworms and nematoda. So let's have the overview of muscular system. The formation of the muscular system begins about fourth week of embryonic development. The beginning of cells are called myoblasts. Then most of all the muscles derive from mesodermal in origin. Except to some smooth muscle tissues such as pupils, sweat glands, and mammary gland, they differentiated from the ectoderm. So, the muscular system consists of skeletal musculature, cardiac musculature, and smooth musculature. Skeletal muscles are derived from paraaxial mesoderm, and this forms somites which from the occipital to the sacral region and somatomeres that develops in the head. So based on the mesodermal origin of muscles, so from the embryonic mesoderm, it divided into three subgroups of mesoderms. We have the intermediate, lateral mesoderm, and paraaxial mesoderm. The intermediate mesoderm differentiates further into urogenital systems such as kidney, ureter, and adrenal cortex, the gonads but not the gametes, vagina, uterus, uterine tubes, while in the lateral mesoderm, uh, divided into two subgroups. We have the splanchnic mesoderm and the somatic mesoderm. Under the splanchnic mesoderm, it differentiates further into visceral pleura or peritoneum, mesenteries, epicardium, blood vessels, blood cells, endothelium, and endocardium. While also myocardium, respiratory tract wall, and gut wall. While in the somatic mesoderm, we have the skeletal muscles, and parietal pleura, pericardium, and peritoneum. So, the first group of muscles, we have the serrated skeletal musculature. Musculature of the head, composed of axial skeleton and body wall, are formed by the somites and somatomeres. So from the occipital region caudally, somites form and differentiate into sclerotome, dermatome. So based on the diagram as presented before. So the dermatome, these are two muscles forming regions. So one in the dorsolateral region to the somite provides progenitor cells for limb and body, or call it the hypomeric. So limb and body wall musculature represented by the hypomeric. The other in the dorsomedial region forms the myotome or the epimeric musculature. So the head musculature also, all voluntary muscles of the head regions are derived from paraaxial mesoderm or the somatomeres and somites, including the muscle of the tongue, eye, except on the iris, which derived from the optic cup ectoderm, and associated with the pharyngeal visceral arches. Okay, the patterns of muscle formation in the head are directed by the connective tissue elements called the neural crest cells. The cardiac muscle develops from splanchnic mesoderm surrounding the endothelial heart tube. Myoblasts adhere to one another by special attachments that later develop into intercalated disc. So, myofibrils develop as in the skeletal muscles, but myoblasts do not fuse. During later development, few special bundles of muscle cells with irregular distributed myofibrils become visible. So, these bundles of Purkinje fibers from the conductive systems of the heart. So, those are the structures inside the cardiac muscle. Smooth muscles differentiate from splanchnic mesoderm surrounding the gut and its derivatives. So this is the splanchnic mesoderm layer. Cardiac muscles are derived from splanchnic mesoderm also, surrounding the heart tube. How about the smooth muscle? Smooth muscles derive from splanchnic mesoderm, surrounding the endoderm of the gut and its derivatives. The ciliary muscles and sphincter papillae muscles of the eye are also derived from neural crest ectoderm. Vascular smooth muscles differentiates from local mesoderm adjacent to vascular endothelium. Now let's proceed on the structure and organization level of the muscle. Okay, let's for example, we have a specific muscle like gastrocnemius. So the structure, we have here a whole set of muscle. So the muscle was covered with epimysium. This is each muscle like gastrocnemius, digastric, they are covered by a connective tissue called epimysium. Then inside a group of a certain muscle, we have here the fascicle. Okay, the fascicle was grouped and enclosed by epimysium. Then that tendon is a connective tissue to attach the muscle to the bone. Now let's get this fascicle. So let's proceed to another level. Fascicle is a portion of the muscle. So this is a part of the fascicle. Now the fascicle was covered again by a certain type of connective tissue called the perimysium. So this is a perimysium, a covering, a tissue. So each fascicle is composed of a muscle fiber. So fascicle is a discrete bundle of muscle cells segregated from the rest of the muscle by a connective tissue sheet called the perimysium. So we get this muscle fiber, and for the next level, to the micro level, we have here the muscle fiber. The muscle fiber, we have here the nucleus and another enclosed by another tissue called endomysium. So the endomysium is another sheet that covers the muscle fiber. And inside a muscle fiber, we have here the myofibril. Okay, the myofibril. Now, the myofibril, or the fibril itself, this is the complex organelle composed of bundles of myofilaments. So myofibrils are rod-like contractile elements that occupy most of the muscle cell volume. Composed of sarcomeres arranged end to end. So this is one set of sarcomere attached end to end. So they appear banded, and bands of adjacent myofibrils are aligned. So if we had to get this 1 unit of sarcomere, so the sarcomere, we are here, the sarcomere. It is a segment of myofibril. So sarcomere is a contractile unit composed of myofilaments made up of contractile proteins. So what are those proteins? We have here the actin and the myosin filament. So these are the two kinds of filaments. Now, the actin filament, so this is the actin. You have a line here, dark line, dark thin line. So that is the actin filament, and the thicker one, the reddish one found at the center, this is the reddish one. We have the myofilament. So this is the thick filament, and this is the thin filament, the actin. So if we have to look the drawing further on the sarcomere, so we have here different areas of the sarcomere. So we have here the thick filament represented by the myosin. The myosin had a head and a tail, while the actin is composed of globular proteins. Okay, so the actin filament were attached to an I band. So this is our I band. That's mean. So it shows a Z line in appearance, while the myosin was located between the actin filaments. So the area of the sarcomere that shows the area of the myosin filament, it is called the A band. And each end, the center part of the myosin filament, we have then the M line, composed of creatine kinase and a certain type of enzyme. And the area where no overlapping actin filament, it is called the H zone. The I band, this is the area where the myosin filament is not overlapped with the actin filament. It is called the I band. So these are some of the areas within the sarcomere. And that is also the indicator during muscle contraction. Now let's proceed to function. So what are the functions of our muscular system? Okay, it provides voluntary movement of the body. It enables us breathing, movement of the food inside our intestine. It also maintains posture. It holds our posture upright, or if we want to bend downwards. It maintains, or it produces heat during activity. It causes the heartbeat, so that is part of the involuntary movement of the organ, represented by the cardiac muscle. Direct circulation of blood, so it regulates blood pressure, send blood to different areas to the body. Another function is provides movement to internal organs. So move food through digestive tract. It enables bladder control. It causes involuntary actions, like what we have the action of the pupil in terms of the presence and absence of light. It causes the hair to stand up, or we have the goosebumps. So those are some of the functions of the muscular system. Now, there are also types of muscles based on color. So we have the red muscle and the white muscle. Red muscle is also known as the type 1 muscle, while white muscles is also known as the type 2 muscles. Now these two types of muscle fiber will be compared based on number of capillaries. because in the red muscle there are only lots of supply of capillaries, while in white muscle very few capillaries. Red muscles, lots of blood supply, uh, high amounts of myoglobin or red pigmented, so they are uh, highly oxidated. So it gets its energy from the aerobic respiration, and they are very thin and weak. So the action of contraction is moderate to slow. So since the contraction is very slow, so it is fatigue resistant. While the white muscle, or we call the type 2 muscles, they have few capillaries, little blood supply of blood, low myoglobin content, so likely they are paler appearance compared to the red muscles. Sometimes they are white or less myoglobin, low myoglobin. So it gets its energy through anaerobic respiration or through the process of glycolysis. They are thick and strong, so it contracts fast. So, but it is not resistant to fatigue, so it easily tires. So what we have, yung gastrocnemius. So when it gets tired, okay, accumulation of lactic acid, then we will suffer cramping. So let's have an example of a white muscle and a combination of two muscle fiber. So we have the flounder. The meat is white because usually the flounder lifestyle is more on it stays on the substrate or below bottom of the sea, where it waits only for the prey. So it doesn't swim all around. Unlike in the tuna, they are pelagic. When I say pelagic, they move always, all the time, day and night. So they need a lot of supply of energy. So the muscles are highly vascularized. So a lot of myoglobin. While we have also the salmon, which is paler compared to the tuna meat, and it is a combination of red and white fiber. That's why you have there that kind of pattern among salmon, which is pinkish or pale orange meat. So let's proceed on how the muscles are named. So muscles are named based on the following criteria. It could either be based on location, the shape, the size, fiber direction, or the origin or location, and also attachments, and some are named based on its action or function. So in the muscular system, we have three major types. Sa higher vertebrates, we have three major types. What are those muscles? We have the skeletal muscle, cardiac, and smooth. Okay. These three muscles were compared based on location, function, nervous control or control mode, shape, and some of the characteristics. Okay. Sa skeletal, it is merely attached to the bone. It is not the bone. It is attached to the bone. Okay. You have to complete that. It is not only on bone, not bone, but attached to the bone. Then the movement function is more on movement of bone. Control, voluntary. So that is voluntary control. The shape is cylindrical, blunt end. So it is long, slender, blunt end, cylindrical also. And the characteristics, striated in arrangement. So it is not regular. The fibers are not arranged regular or in parallel with each other. And this type of muscle, fast contracting. So it is not resistant to fatigue. So the contraction is fast and it is not resistant to fatigue. Now let's proceed on the cardiac. A cardiac located only in the heart. So beating function is responsible for the beating of the heart. Control is involuntary. And the shape of the fiber is branching. Some references would say syncytial because it shows that it is irregular. At the same time, if they are going to look deeper in microscopic level, it is branching. Number of nucleus, we forgot to state that the number of nucleus in skeletal, there are several number of nucleus inside the skeletal muscle, while in cardiac only one number of nucleus. So characteristics, so striated like the skeletal but branching in manner, one or two nuclei. At the same time, the contraction is very moderate and it also moderately resistant to fatigue when compared to skeletal. Next, we have the smooth muscle. Smooth muscle usually located sa mga visceral organs, and the movement function is more on the movement of internal organs. The movement is involuntary control like the cardiac, but the shape of the muscle, some would say na it is a spindle shape, which means both ends are pointed. Both ends are pointed. Some books would say needle shape. Some would say spindle shape, as long as the end of each cell is pointed. It is not blunt like sa skeletal and cardiac, the ends are blunt. Now, other characteristics of the smooth, it only has one nucleus per cell like the cardiac, but in terms of contraction, the contraction was very slow. And since this contraction was very slow, it is highly resistant to fatigue. So that's the difference between the skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Now, in the macroscopic structure of muscle, macro. So we have here that especially on the skeletal muscle. So the skeletal muscle, on each end, you have there the tendon. The tendon will serve as attaches the muscle to the bone. And when we say origin, so when we study in the skeletal muscle, it is important that you know the origin, insertion, and action. So origin is the attachment of muscle to immovable fixed bone. So like for example here, the biceps, the origin is on top of the long bone. You have here a tendon, and where is inserted sa radius. It was inserted on radius. So that's the insertion. The insertion is the attachment to movable bone. The belly, this is the bulging portion of the muscle. Now, muscles were named also based on the shape. And there are several shapes of the muscle in higher vertebrates. We have here the fusiform type, like what we have in biceps brachii. We have also the parallel type, found in rectus abdominis. We have the convergent type, for example, the pectoralis major. And the unipinnate type, we have the palmar interosseous muscle. The bipinnate type, we have the rectus femoris. The multipinnate type, we have the deltoid muscles found in our arms. And the orbicularis oculi, which is likely cellular. So this the cellular muscle usually found sa mga openings. Pwede sa anus, pwede sa mga constrictors, and eyes, and the mouth. Okay, another type of name based on shape, we have also the quadrangular muscle, trapezoidal muscle, like with the pectoralis, triangular muscle, the fusiform, digastric, found in our neck, bicipital muscles with two heads, and the rhomboidal muscles. Okay, in terms of action muscle, some muscles were named after on its action. But muscles also perform specific function and action. So we have here the flexon, which is a work of a lever in which your arm and forearm close together, so that is flexion. And if you want to straighten your arms, that is extension. You have the abduction, then adduction, pronation, pinakulob, supination, sa Bisaya, pinahayang, and circumduction, circular movement, rotation, movement of the head, protraction, retraction, that is the movement of your lower mandible. Protraction, you have to move your mandible forward, like what we have. Yeah, if you're going to move your mandible forward, you look like ay de las alas. If you move your mandible retraction, you look like what always did by Jim Carrey. Okay, eversion, that is the movement of your feet. Elevation and depression could also be the movement of your mandible. When you open your mandible, the muscles are depressed, pulling it downward. When you have to elevate, so the muscles of the lower mandible pulls up, that is elevation. So to close your mouth. Sa back portion naman, elevation when you're going to lift your shoulder up, and depression if the muscle pulls downward position. Other actions of muscles like dilator, opens a part or opening, like the mouth. We have also the constrictor, it closes an opening, so pharynx and the abdomen. We have also levator muscles, raises a part or lower in closing the mouth, yeah. And depressor lowers a part of the lower jaw, so depressor. So when you open, drops your lower mandible, that is depressor. So if you want to close your mouth, that is levator. Other actions like agonist or the prime mover. Example to that, we have the deltoid muscles in abduction of arm. Antagonist, that is the opposite movement of agonist. So opposite movement, latissimus dorsi and pectoralis for deltoid muscle. Synergist, stabilize movement of one joint, inhibit undesirable movements. So we have the brachialis that assists the biceps to create the movement and stabilize the elbow joint. Fixator, fixes position in the limb when the movement occurs. So we have there the biceps and triceps as an example. Flexor, muscles that bends the joint when contracted. So this one is flexor. We have the hamstrings. Extensor, so extensor where the legs are straightened. So muscles that strengthens the joint when contracted. So example, the quadriceps. Contracted muscles is short, firm, tight, and thicker around. Relaxed muscles is stretched, long, loose, and thin around. So these are the movement. Contracted and relaxed are one of the movements of our muscles. So this is another constrictors, draw parts together and compress the space like the pharynx and the abdomen. Sphincters, dilators, widens and opening or space. So we have also constrictors at the end of our stomach, so that to avoid backflow. So we have the sphincters like the mouth, the pylorus, and anus. So let's proceed on the vertebrae musculature. For the primitive type of vertebrae, we have the muscular system of the lampreys, which is more primitive than other vertebrates. Because a lateral septum is lacking, thus the prominent axial musculature is not derived into epaxial and hypaxial division. So if you're going to check on the lamprey muscle, so this is the axial musculature of the lamprey. So there are only two divisions, the epaxial represented in the upper part and hypaxial on the lower part. So no lateral septum, but there we have myomeres and myosepta. So this is one set of the muscles, myomere, and it is separated by a myosepta. So each myotome contributes one muscle segment called myomere. The short fiber of myomeres are inserted in partitions of connective tissue called myosepta, which lies between the successive myomeres. So if we're going to check on the cross-section of the lamprey, you will see here, these are the group of muscles. We have the myomeres enclosed by a myoseptum. So it was just simple. In lampreys, there are no appendicular musculature. So they don't have pelvic like other chondrichthyes and osteichthyes, that they have pelvic fins, they have pectoral girdle dito, no paired appendages, but they have brachial muscles. So let's proceed on the jawed fishes. Now the muscles of the jawed, or we call the nastosomes, another term for the jawed fishes, are more advanced, less complex than the tetrapods. So more advanced in relation to the agnathans, or called the lampreys. Now in terms of axial musculature, like the agnathans, they have the two divisions. We have here the epaxial and the hypaxial, located on the lower portion of, or the belly of the fish. We have also they have the lateral septum, in which is absent in lamprey, but they have also myomeres and myosepta. So the myomeres become more angled compared to the lampreys and are molded into interlocking cones. So parang zigzag in appearance. Like what we have here, another diagram of the fish. So this is how the muscles are arranged. So it has a zigzag in appearance. Now for the cross section, you have here from the skin, you have the epaxial and the hypaxial horizontal septum. So each muscle was enclosed by a myoseptum. So they were separated by a myoseptum. So another diagram, so near the fish heads, they have already dilator operculi attached near to the eyes, levator operculi, and so these are the muscles near the mouth. So we have the epixialis, another term for epaxial muscle. So we have hypaxialis. So strap-like hypobranchial muscles extend from the pectoral girdle. So pectoral girdle to the visceral arches and serve to open the jaws and pull the gills downward and backward, and evolve from hypaxial muscles retaining longitudinal operation of fibers. So these are the muscles that opens the visceral arches. Next, we have also the appendicular musculature is already present, which is absent in agnatans dun sa lampreys. So they have already the paired appendages. So dorsal muscle extensor. So there's a development of abductor levators that involves in the upward or forward movement of the fins, and a series of levators above the pharynx lift the gill bars. So there are also ventral muscle flexor. So meron ng adductor depressors, moving fins downward or backward, and adductor reduce the internal angle of each visceral arc. In eyes, fishes have 6 intrinsic eye muscles. You have here the dorsal oblique, ventral oblique, the medial rectus, dorsal rectus, and lateral rectus, and the ventral rectus. Okay, those are the muscles of the eye of the fish. Some fishes have specialized muscle, like for example, the more electric eels. So they have electric organs, but it is rare to some most fishes, but present lang ito sa mga electric eels, like torpedo rays, electric skates, stargazers, mga South American knife fishes, and African murmuriform fishes. So they have these electric organs. It is a modified hypaxial muscle. Now let's proceed to amphibians. Okay, amphibians, if you're going to review the amphibians, we have 3 major groups. You have the apoda, represented by the Sicilians. Then you lizard type with the presence of tail. You have the Urodela. And amphibians with no tail, the anorants. So let's start with the apoda. Okay, burrowing machines, called the Sicilians. The head musculature, so the skull evolves to be increasingly ossified. So this, even though they are very small, they have ossified bones. And in advanced Sicilians, the temporal fossa are sealed and adductor mandibulae are much reduced. The interhyoideus posterior muscle becomes more developed and serves to close the jaw by pulling back and down, so levate and depressor, behind the hinge of the lower jaw, so that pulls the lower mandible. So these muscles are enormous in advanced Sicilians. So we have here the diagram. So we have the primitive Sicilian. So we have here a small muscle of interhyoideus posterior. So based on the name, it was attached in hyoid and interhyoid bone. And we have also here the advanced family of Sicilian, family Ictiophilidae. So it's the interhyoideus posterior muscle was quite larger compared sa family of Rhinatimathidae. So they have also the abductor mandibulae, okay, that pulls the lower mandible. So the interhydrangea muscle attached to an extension of the mandible behind the hinge of the lower jaw. So this muscle essentially pulls back on the lever, swinging the mandible closed with great force. So why? So the answer is related to boring efficiency. So the trend of muscle arrangement and modification is even more pronounced in the highly specialized burrowing species known below. So since their habit or their behavior, they are more on burrowing, so the muscles will tend just to ideal for opening. So long retracular process makes a lever since their mouth is always closed when they burrows. Next, let's proceed sa mga urodela or urodel. Now, we have the tree diagram. Shark are not urodel. The spinodon is not a urodel. But we have here the salamander, a representative from the urodel. So, it is an amphibian. It has lizard-like appearance, but it is not under the reptilian group, but on the amphibian group. So, the lateral septum is more dorsal in position. Myotoms, some primitive muscle fiber still occurs from one myocomata to the next, and the entire epaxial mass form dorsalis truncae. So, you have here the reddish portion, yung epaxial muscle. So, the myotoms ventrally arranged. So, the myotoms are ventrally arranged, intersegmental bundles. Okay. Next, the anurans. The anurans, or the frogs, the dorsalis truncae become differentiated into transversarial muscle between the transverse process and interneural process between the neural arches. Transverse process. So, nandito yan. Next, the hypaxial muscle of amphibians. In adult urodel, the ventral trunk muscles beginning from the outside. There's a superficial and deep external oblique occurs to posterior ventral direction. So, the development of oblique muscles. And internal oblique. So, when you say internal oblique and external oblique, usually found sa mga abdomen, near the abdomen. So, transversus, which fibers almost in a vertical position, lies next to the peritoneum. So, it is near to the bone. So, lastly, the amphibians have muscles that move the tongue and derive from the hypobranchial muscle. So, the tongue derived from hypobranchial muscle. So, let's proceed sa muscle of the reptiles. Reptiles' axial musculature, the epaxial muscle, functions to extend or straighten the spine and provide some lateral flexion. So, it lacks myosepta and become more complex. So, the myosepta in this group disappear. Okay. Hypaxial muscles function to bend the spine and provides lateral bending. So, we have the subvertebral group, rectus abdominis, and lateral group muscles. Appendicular musculature, more numerous and diverse in amphibians. Intrinsic muscles, quadrupedal locomotion, meron na siyang dorsal, extensor, and ventral flexor muscles. It has already the extrinsic integumentary muscles inserted on the underside of the dermis. So, meron ng muscles attached to the skin. In the forelimbs, trapezius muscle. So, this is a trapezius muscle derived from the branchial musculature. So it grows and widens. Several muscles derived from axial musculature. More appendicular muscles are derived directly from appendicular muscles of the fish ancestor. Hind limbs, dorsal and ventral muscles group again recognized. So we have the caudofemoralis. It is a prominent flexor of the thigh of the reptiles. Um, I think to some reptiles with limbs except to limbless one like snakes and limbless lizards. Extrinsic eyeball muscles is already present, so the eyeball can no longer be rotated around its optical axis. So unlike sa unlike in mammals, the eyeball can move within its orbit, but in reptiles, it is immovable. Pyramidalis muscles inserted in the upper eyelids and nictitating membrane of reptiles. So there's a movement for the eyelids. So we have the pyramidalis. Integumentary muscles, especially in snakes, locomotor apparatus may include separate muscles, the costocutaneous. So it is moved to ventral scutes. So reptiles is the first group of vertebrates that has integumentary muscles. So they have muscles already in the integument. Humans have also muscles in the integument in smaller size that pulls the hair. That's why we feel goosebumps.